Yes, Antiochus Epiphanies IV was a picture, a portrait, and a type of the Antichrist, that son of perdition, that vile one who is to come in the future. And you're going to see proof of that right now. Watch this. By the way, guys, I've got a new book coming out. You can pre-order it now on Amazon, and it's See Jesus in the Old Testament. And if you want to watch it for free, you don't even have to get this book. I'm going to keep the price really low, but if you want to watch this playlist right here, How to Find Jesus in the Old Testament, you can watch it on YouTube for free and get pretty much the same information. So this is just something that I'm looking forward to. It's going to come out in about August, but you can pre-order it right now. The link's down in the description below. All right, let's get into this, guys. So this is Antiochus Epiphanies the fourth, right? This is what he looked like. This is an actual carving of his portrait of his head, right? So this guy right here was where we get the Maccabean revolt, where we get Hanukkah from and all that. It speaks of what happened with this evil, vile person right here, this Antiochus guy. So he was also a picture and a portrait, just like Joseph was a picture and a portrait and a type of Jesus Christ. This guy was a picture and a portrait of the Antichrist. And I can prove that to you right now. And we're going to look into it, but we're also going to look into Daniel's scripture in Daniel chapter 9, how that was all prophecy, forecasting, foreshadowing, or telling you about this guy who was to come. And even the Jewish people today believe that this guy fulfilled that Daniel chapter 9, that evil one, the abomination of desolation of the temple and all that stuff, which he did, but that he was a foreshadow of the one to come too, you guys. So that's what we see here. So let's get into the scripture itself, guys. This is going to blow you away. So Daniel chapter 9, this is good stuff, right? Daniel chapter 9, while I was still speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people, interesting, he confesses his sin first, very important, you guys, and the sin of my people, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God in behalf of the holy mountain of my God, while I was still speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, right, the angel Gabriel, who I had seen in the vision previously, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. And he instructed me and talked with me and said, Daniel, I have come now to give you insight with understanding. At the beginning of your pleas, the command was issued, and I have come to tell you because you are highly esteemed. So pay attention to the message and gain understanding of the vision. This is so good. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the wrongdoing, to make an end to sin, to make atonement for guilt, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. What is he talking about here? 70 weeks is actually 70 sevens. The weeks are sets of seven, not actual weeks, but you're going to see more. Watch this. So you are to know and understand that from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, we know when that was, right? That Nehemiah had the decree from Artaxerxes. We know that actually took place, and it's recorded in history. There will be 7 weeks or 7 sets of years, 7 years, right? And 62 sets of 7 or weeks. And it will be built again with streets and a moat, and even in times of distress. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off. Now we're getting into something interesting here. He says the Messiah will be cut off after the what? 62 weeks. So if you do, I'm not going to do all the math here, you guys, I'm not good at math, but if you add up all these numbers right here that we just looked at, you add them all up, and it comes to the 1,800 800 something days. Okay. There's a guy named Sir Robert Anderson. He worked for the Scotland Yard, this Scottish guy, and he added up all the numbers, and he figured out if you use the prophetic years, the 360 years, not the 365, but 360 from the Jewish calendar, and you added all those days up, it took you to 32 AD. I think it was 6 Nisan 32 or 10 Nisan 32 AD when it was Palm Sunday. Amazing stuff. And it actually, he shows how it all works out, and it does. And you might want to check that out. But here in Daniel, we're seeing that. We're seeing that the Messiah will, it says after the 62 weeks, after these numbers of days happen, right? And this is what we see. The Messiah will be cut off. That means killed. And have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come, speaking of the Antichrist, right, will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war, and desolations are determined. Now we're speaking future prophetic language, speaking after the Messiah is cut off. And this was not fulfilled in 70 AD. Some people think that. They think that Revelation speaks of 70 AD. No, Revelation was written well after that, in the 90s, mid to late 90s AD, because that's when John went to the island of Patmos, and that's where he wrote it. So that's what we see there. So Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, and he will confirm a covenant. Speaking of this vile person, this character that's coming, he will confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week. 1 week, here we see that again. It doesn't mean a literal week. It means a set of 7 years. But in the middle of the week, right, the middle of the 7 years, 3.5 years in, if you read Revelation, you see that 3.5 years in, the 2 witnesses are killed by the beast, which is the Antichrist. And then he sets himself up in the temple to be worshiped. So that's what we see there. But this Antiochus Epiphanies guy did the same thing, but in a more foreshadowing way. So he will confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. That's 7 years, that 7-year period. But in the middle of it, he will put a stop to the sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come the one who makes desolate until the complete destruction. One that is decreed gushes forth on the one who makes desolate. So that's what we're seeing. This is a picture of Antiochus Epiphanies. And I told you I was going to show you some pictures of him. So we looked at this, right? And there's more. So if you just go to Wikipedia, you can see all this information of when he was around, his life, all that stuff, and what the Jewish people did with this guy. So in 175 BC, right, we see that he was Seleucus, the fourth, which was a predecessor of this guy, was there. And then we see that this guy came into power. So Antiochus Epiphanes was an evil man. Here's some coins that show his face. And on it says Antiochus Epiphanios, which means God manifest. Antiochus, God manifest. So he was calling himself God. He was a very Antichrist type of a guy, but he wasn't the Antichrist. Okay, but he was like him. So if you study him, you could figure out how the Antichrist is, or what he's like, or what to expect. And that's the whole point of this, you guys. So he had a wife, and guess what? His wife's name was Laodice, right? Laodice the fourth. Did you know that Laodicea, the place that Jesus talked about, that the church of Laodicea, that he wasn't even in that church, they weren't even true believers, that he spat out of his mouth? Laodicea was named after Laodice, after Antiochus Epiphanes' bride. That's crazy, right? So let's go further into that. Let's look at some of the stuff that this guy did. So here we're going to look at what happened with right here in particular, the persecution of the Jews and the Maccabean revolt. Okay, this is what was going on here. So the Seleucids, right? This is the generals that were before this guy, the rulers before Antiochus Epiphanes. They held rule over Judea, and they respected the Jewish culture. This policy was drastically reversed by Antiochus the fourth, Epiphanes, right? Seemingly after what was either a dispute or leadership of the temple in Jerusalem and the office of the high priest, or possibly a revolt over whose nature was lost to time after being crushed. So So he came in and he was angry at the Jewish people in the temple, and he took all of his anger out on them. So the locals revolts against the local revolt against the Seleucid Empire were not unusual, but most were not successful. The revolt that Antiochus Epiphanes ultimately triggered in Judea was unusually well chronicled and preserved. So we could see it in these Maccabean books, these Potiphar, these are history books, right? Second Maccabees and the other ones. And in 171 BC, Antiochus had disposed the high priest Jason and replaced him with Menelaus. So he had this high priest Jason kicked off or even killed. We don't know for sure, but so this guy, this guy that he had him replaced with was who offered Antiochus a large bribe to secure the office. So this guy was corrupt. In 168 BC, when Antiochus was campaigning in Egypt, a rumor spread in Judea that he had been killed. Jason gathered a force of 1,000 soldiers and made a surprise attack on the city of Jerusalem. So Menelaus was forced to flee Jerusalem during the ensuing riot. Jason's intentions have been to retake his former office by force and present his resumption of power to rule as the high priest. But Antiochus Epiphanes was still alive and returned from Egypt enraged by the reverse he had suffered at the hands of the Romans. So literally what happened was Antiochus was down south of Jerusalem and he was fighting. He wanted to go in and fight with the Egyptians, right? Well, this Roman general came down and he literally drew a line in the sand around Antiochus Epiphanes and said, if you cross that line, then you're going to be at war with Rome. And it humiliated him and he was angry. And that's literally where we get the word draw a line in the sand. I'm drawing a line in the sand right here. That's where we get that from. But Antiochus was so livid and humiliated and angry that he came up to Jerusalem and he took his rage out on the Jewish people. And that's what happened here. So let's go back to what Wikipedia is showing us here with this history. And so when those happenings were reported to the king, he thought that Judea was in revolt, raging like a wild animal. He set out from Egypt and took Jerusalem by storm. He ordered his soldiers to cut down without mercy those whom they met and to slay those who took refuge in their houses. Doesn't that speak of what happened with the Hamas against Israel just recently on October 7th? Same spirit, the same satanic, evil, demonic spirit, you guys. So there was a massacre of young and old, a killing of women and children, a slaughter of virgins and infants. In the space of 3 days, 80,000 of these Jewish people were lost, 40,000 meeting a violent death, and the same number being sold into slavery. Wow. That second Maccabees, where that was recorded. So this guy was very vile, okay? A very vile man. And he's a picture of the Antichrist, first of all, because his bride was Laodice, right? We see Laodicea. Now, the church before Laodicea in Revelation chapter 3 is the church of Philadelphia. And God says specifically there's an open door to heaven for them, that they would be spared from the hour of trial that's coming upon the whole face of the whole world, right? There speaks of that tribulation period. I believe that church is that church that's raptured up into heaven. God's people raptured up into heaven before the Great Tribulation period. But I think, I could be wrong, but I think this church of Laodicea is left behind. And I think this is the church, like the progressive church of today, right? And they were the bride. Okay, the bride of Antiochus Epiphanes was Laodice. And that place is called Laodicea. That church was the church of Laodicea. Amazing stuff, guys. It's all in the Bible. You should read it. But when Jesus talked about the end, okay, he wasn't talking back about Antiochus Epiphanes. He was speaking, when he referenced Daniel, talking about when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, then run for the hills. He's speaking about the future. I believe he's speaking about that tribulation period, that last set of 7 years, because the 69 sets of 7, the 69 weeks, as you may have heard it, has been fulfilled. But that last 7-year period has never been fulfilled, and it will be. It will be. And that covenant will be broken in the middle, right? Because we know that Antichrist will sign a 7-year peace agreement with the Jews in the West, and he'll break it in the middle and come in and murder and destroy. And that's when Jesus said, run for the hills, get out of Jerusalem if you're in there at this time. If you're watching this video, get out of there if you see this. So that's what we're seeing here, you guys. This guy was a picture and a type of the Antichrist to come. So, hey, God bless you. Don't forget, hit this playlist right here, How to Find Jesus in the Old Testament. Click on this playlist. You will be blessed by it. I promise you.